On today's show, the World Juniors have officially arrived in Ottawa.
And to preview the tournament, we have friend of the show, prospect expert Scott Wheeler from The Athletic.
This is Brady Tkachuk, and you're listening to the Locked On Senators podcast.
You're Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome! You are locked on to the Ottawa Senators, the only daily podcast covering the Sens. On the outskirts of enemy territory, I'm Ross Levitan, alongside Brandon Piller up in the Blue Mountains. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can get started with a big return on FanDuel. New customers who place a $5 bet will get started with $250 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet hits. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today is Thursday, December 26th. I hope everybody had a safe and Merry Christmas. Happy first day of Hanukkah and enjoyed our Sens Jeopardy yesterday. But we're back talking about that puck moving around the rink, Pillsy. The World Juniors, one of the best times of the year.
Yeah, although obviously Sens fans are looking to fulfill their hockey itch, Sens won't play until Saturday. So the World Juniors coming is a very, very good substitute, except for the fact I still haven't forgiven Team Canada for snubbing Carter Yakemchuk, but that's okay, Ross, because if you don't have a top prospect on Team Canada, what's the next best thing? A goalie for Team Kazakhstan.
The amount of people that have asked me, hey, how many Sens prospects are at the tournament this year? And not only do you have to answer, but you have to say it's the goalie for Kazakhstan is one of the funniest things going. Hey, shout out to Kazakhstan, though. Those guys were able to go from the below World Juniors, like the Division One, into this tournament. And it was on the back of Vladimir Nikitin, who put up unreal numbers in that tournament last year. So if you want to see a goalie face a bajillion shots, he's your guy. He's going to be playing at TD Place Arena, which is just a stone's throw from the GLEBE Central Pub. So make that a 1-2 punch. You can also take the Sens Shuttle to and from all Team Canada games for $20 round trip. Game 1 tonight against Finland. That's going to be an awesome one. The tournament actually starts at noon today between Sweden and Slovakia at TD Place Arena. And then 2:30 p.m. I'll be tuning in for this one. Germany versus the United States. And I don't know if you saw, Pilsy, but Tim Stützle was a part of Team Germany's captaincy announcement this morning.
Yeah, I love that they had him involved. I mean, with the tournament in Ottawa and obviously Tim Stützle being on the Team Germany World Junior team many years ago. I'll never forget that moment, Ross. What was the final score? 16-1?
Oh, I think Germany had 2.
It was like 14-2 or whatever, and Tim Stützle was just devastated. And after the game, the Sens signed him to his entry-level deal. So it was like a very bittersweet moment for a young Tim Stützle, I'm sure.
16-2 was the final score there. Yeah.
Yeah, so a tough game, but Timmy was rewarded with an NHL contract. I think it was literally right after the game, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, crazy moment.
Pierre Dorion said, we love winners, and then signed him to that contract after a 16-2 loss. He was so good in that tournament, though. 10 points in 5 games, wearing the C for Team Germany. So awesome that Stützle was a part of the captaincy announcement. The Senators, by the way, will be back in action Saturday and Sunday in Winnipeg, in Minnesota. We'll have boots on the ground for the Saturday game, and I believe they're at practice tomorrow. We're going to try to time the episode to get you the latest on Linus Ullmark, as all Sens fans are wondering, hoping that he's going to be okay. But this is a great conversation with Scott Wheeler. We talk not only about the tournament in terms of who's going to win, who he likes, who he doesn't like, but also the draft eligibles. This is where we start our draft prep, Pillsy. We're not full year prospect guys, but from World Juniors to the draft, it's so fun to see the arms race. And it sounds like there's no clear-cut number one this year as there have been in years past.
Yeah, it's always a little bit more fun when there's not a clear-cut number one. Like it kind of takes a lot of the intrigue out of the draft lottery when it's like, well, whoever wins it is getting this guy, and then we'll see who the rest of the lottery teams get. So it's going to be interesting because certain teams might pick a certain player that other teams wouldn't pick if they had first overall. So that makes the lottery a whole lot more exciting. But hopefully, Ross, we don't give a damn about the lottery when the lottery balls spin and the percentages start going. I don't want to even think about opening tankathon.com.
How nice was it? By the way, FanDuel has James Hagan's minus 134 to go first overall, or you can bet the field for plus 102. I'm going to bet the field.
Betting the field, yeah.
I like the odds. I like the odds on that one. But Pilsy, did you see yesterday when the NHL tweeted out if the playoffs started today? That was fun.
Oh, yeah, it was fun. Now, a little nerve-wracking, though, Ross, because I don't think I would want to go up against the New Jersey Devils, not only because they are a really good team with a lot of depth all around this year, but also, like we talked about in Jeopardy, there and with our Sens Central Citizen, there have been some heartbreaking Sens memories up against the Devils in the playoffs. So that would be a little intimidating. But hey, I'll play. If we make the playoffs, Ross, I'll play any team that wants to play us. Just get us into the dance.
Exactly. Get your ticket to the dance and then try to work your moves from there. That's the play for Ottawa this year as they sit in a wild card spot right now with 34 games into the NHL season. But today's not about the NHL. We'll get back to the Sens tomorrow. Today is about the World Juniors. I mean, there's tons of Sens content still. Why Carter Yakemchuk was snubbed. We'll get Scott's thoughts on that. Vladimir Nikitin, and a whole lot more. This is Locked On Senators, your team every day.
Today's episode is brought to you by friends over at Mary J's. You guys know that Mary J's is a locally owned cannabis dispensary in the Ottawa area. You can check them out at one of their 4 locations, Riverside South, Orleans, Greeley, and Russell. They got the best and newest products in the market, and they're always adding new stuff to the menu every single week to keep it fresh. They got competitive pricing. In fact, they're going to price match any store in Ottawa. That means you're guaranteed to get the best price around when you shop at Mary J's. And they have awesome customer service with friendly bud tenders who are always ready to help you out. One of the owners, Dashy, he's an absolute beauty, and he's a diehard Sens fan. So go to one of the stores, say what up to Dashy.
What up?
Pick his brain about the Sens and all the latest, greatest products that Mary J's has to offer, and check out their website and pick yourself up a loyalty card. Check it out today, guys. Mary J's Dispensary.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Gametime. Do you need last-minute tickets? Of course you want them at the lowest prices, so go check them out at Gametime. I'm going to be using Gametime on Saturday for the Sens-Jets game because I know that as the game approaches, the ticket prices typically plummet. And I know that Gametime picks will take out the fluff and only show me incredible deals on all the best seats. I also turn that toggle for all-in pricing on, so there's no surprise fees at checkout. The lowest price guarantee or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find the same seats in the same section and row for less somewhere else. Gametime also has the most flexible ticketing coverage in the ticketing industry, so take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. This is for sports, music, comedy, theater. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL. That's LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, now for the 11th time ever, here is our prospect analyst, Scott Wheeler from The Athletic. All right, we now welcome one of the most recurring guests ever on Locked On Senators. It's national reporter covering the NHL draft and prospects with The Athletic. It's Scott Wheeler. Welcome back to the show, fella. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's go time here. We're recording this just before Boxing Day, but when this airs or when this is out, I'll be either on a flight or in Ottawa for day 1 of the tournament. So really sort of looking forward. I'm excited to get going here. The build up for this tournament is always fun with the selection camps. I didn't get down to Plymouth for USA's selection camp this year, but was obviously in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago for Canada's selection camp, and have just been excited to maybe see Canada write a little bit of a different script to this year after last year's debacle in Gothenburg. So this year's tournament does feel a little wide open with the big 3 at the top in particular. I think all 3 of those teams, and Sweden being the third, obviously with Canada and the US, are are real sort of competitive teams in this tournament. And I'm antsy to sort of drop the puck already.
And we're antsy to get World Juniors back in Ottawa. For my money, the best tournament ever, where you have Jordan Eberle tying it against the Russians in the semis. Erik Karlsson, then Sens prospect that really was unknown, wins best defenseman in the tournament. So it's about time that we get the World Juniors back in Ottawa. Before we preview the tournament, everyone sees the location. You're in Toronto, but you got a bit of a history in Ottawa. So is it almost a bit of a homecoming? You're a Carleton guy. You covered the 67. So how's it feel coming back to Ottawa?
I'm really looking forward to it. It was nice to be back at TD Place. I was telling some of the media when we were in town for selection camp that I've probably watched more hockey games at TD Place than any other arena. TD Place and unfortunately the Bob, rest in peace to Bob Gurton Arena in Gatineau, that's now been demolished in favor of the Slush Puppy Center, which is also a fantastic arena. But yeah, I've probably watched over 100 hockey games at TD Place. I watched most of the home games that the 67s played there across 4 seasons. I probably hit 60-70% of their home games across 4 seasons, plus playoffs. I've covered a few events there over the years. I know TD Place is on its last legs, and there's big changes coming to that sort of part of Lansdowne, but I think Lansdowne's a good spot. And obviously with the Glebe nearby, I spent a lot of time there in university when I was at Carleton, and was only at Carleton for 4 years, but Ottawa is kind of a second home. I've got a lot of family there. I've got family out in Kemptville. I'm in town a lot to visit them. And my wife and I always said that if we didn't come back to Toronto, that we would have had no problem sort of putting down roots in Ottawa after school. So yeah, we both love it. My wife's probably going to come down and visit in the hotel for a couple of nights and see some old friends. We've still got a ton of old friends there. We've got friends east of the city in the sort of dairy farming part of the country there, and they've got a big dairy farm. And so I'm looking forward to sort of reconnecting with some people and having some fun in Ottawa, which I argue and often argue is an underrated city.
Well, you're already boots on the ground at the GLEBE Central Pub, so you've got our seal of approval.
We'll be
GCP.
there.
Dude, they're doing shuttles to and from each Canada game, too, which is going to be a great vibe there. And what are you most excited about for this tournament? What storyline has your attention?
I think the big one is, as it tends to always be, is just Canada and what this looks like for Canada after what I would call a debacle last year. I don't think it could have gone worse for last year's team. Even when they were winning in the group round a year ago, they weren't winning convincingly. I believe they beat Germany 6-3 on an empty netter, and they just kept talking about how it's coming, and then it just never came. They didn't get Kevin Korchinski and any of the sort of NHL guys back. Zach Benson was a surprise to be in the NHL. Kevin Korchinski was a bit of a surprise to be in the NHL. Then they had injuries to Tanner Molendyk and Tristan Luneau. Matt Poitras came back from the NHL and was horrible, played some of the worst hockey I've ever seen him play. Matt Savoy was supposed to be an important player from that team and couldn't elevate. Jordan Dumais was dealing with a hip injury, and it just never really came together. Outside of Macklin Celebrini, who I thought was excellent at last year's tournament, that Canadian team just didn't have it. And now there's pressure on them because if you have 2 duds in a row, suddenly you start to talk about the management group and who's in charge of making the decisions for Hockey Canada. And it's just unacceptable to not at least be in a medal game for 2 consecutive seasons. And I think this is a very competitive tournament. It feels pretty top heavy. Like we've had the Czechs medal at the last 3 World Juniors, and I think that would be a surprise this time around, but wasn't maybe a surprise at any of the last 3 where they just had deeper age groups. The Slovaks obviously had excellent age groups come through with Simon Nemec and Dalibor Dvorsky and those sort of top dogs. Dvorsky is back for a 5th World Juniors with Maxim Sturbak, who are sort of the 2 pillars of that Slovak team. But even the Finns, the Slovaks, the Czechs, these aren't strong age groups for them. This is actually a very weak age group for the Finns in particular relative to what we're used to seeing. But then on the flip side of that, I think you've got in Sweden, USA, and Canada, you've got 3 really, really strong teams, like 3 teams that I think could beat each other in a semifinal, and it wouldn't be a surprise in any direction. And that makes for a compelling tournament because 2 of those 3 teams are quite likely to play in a semifinal, right? And then again in a gold medal game. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Canada's team is built around being the deepest team in the tournament. They don't have some of the star power that they've had in recent years. I mean, obviously we were spoiled with Bedard and Celebrini, but even beyond those guys, you look back a couple of years ago in Edmonton, they had Mason McTavish and Kent Johnson, and Brant Clark was big for them at a tournament, and Logan Stankoven was excellent. Shane Wright, Dylan Genther. Like, there were just guys on some of the recent Team Canadas that you could look at and say, this team kind of belongs to them. Those are the studs. I'm not sure I have that feeling yet with any of these Canadian players. I think Tanner Molendyk will play 25, 30 minutes a night on the blue line for Canada when it matters. He's their number 1D. But you look up front, is it Bradley Nadeau? Is it Berkeley Catton? Is it Callum Ritchie? Is it Gavin McKenna, Porter Martone? Like, who's going to step up and be the guy for this Canadian team? They maybe don't have that true star power that they've had at some recent World Juniors. And then on the flip side of the coin, you look at what the Americans have, and it's very easy to pinpoint Gabe Perreault, Ryan Leonard, James Hagan, Zeev Boyum, Trey Augustine in net should be the best goalie in the tournament. They have 4 or 5 guys that are clearly top dogs, could win an MVP, could be the directorate top forward or the directorate top defenseman in the tournament in Zeev Boyum's case, but they maybe don't have the depth that Canada has. So I think that's going to be a real interesting New Year's Eve dynamic, because the Americans have the better 4 or 5 top players at the very top of their lineup, but Canada's lineup feels a little bit deeper. And then in net, you'll probably, I think, have Carter George versus Trey Augustine. And in that sense, Trey Augustine as a third-time returnee at this tournament and one of the top goaltenders in college hockey should, in theory, be the better goalie there. So that's going to be a really interesting matchup, and I'm hoping that we get to see it twice in the tournament. We rarely get to see USA Canada twice in the same tournament anymore, so that would be exciting. And then there's the Swedes, who have Axel Sandin Pellikka, another player who could be an MVP at this tournament or the top defenseman at this tournament, point per game in the SHL right now, broke Victor Hedman's U19 scoring record in the SHL last year. Sandin Pellikka should be a dominant player at this tournament. They have Tom Willander, a top pick to the Vancouver Canucks. Theo Lindstein, one of the top defensemen in last year's tournament, sort of completes a 3-headed monster on the blue line for the Swedes. And then up front, they've got a very deep age group as well. So this tournament, I think it'll come down to those 3 teams. I'd be pretty surprised, honestly, if one of those teams were upset in the quarterfinals, for example. But in saying that, those 3 teams, it does feel like it's sort of wide open still.
Scott, you mentioned how Team Canada's management is kind of under a watchful eye after the way last year's tournament went, and they're going to be under a watchful eye from Sens fans, because I cannot believe that Carter Yakemchuk was not even invited to camp. Ross and I already had visions of him running the top power play, and he doesn't even get the invite when Ottawa is hosting it. Can you please try to explain to us why that happened?
I think with Hockey Canada, it often comes down to, if there's one question mark about a player, one thing that they can't quite wrap their head around, that can, I think with them, take on a life of its own. They want guys, especially on the blue line, that they don't have to have a worry about. And I think both with Zane Parekh and Carter Yakemchuk, with Yakemchuk, it was maybe the pace of play, the feet, the mobility was a little bit of a concern. I don't think it's a major one at this level, but it was enough of one that they were just a little bit hesitant after he was off to a good start, but not a great start in the WHL. Certainly they would have seen him play in camp for Ottawa, and he was impressive there, nearly made the team. So that's the case that Steve Staios made to me when I spoke with him sort of in advance of the cuts about what kind of role Yakemchuk could in theory play on the team. And then with Parekh, it was sort of decision making. He's gotten into some suspension trouble. I think they were worried about Parekh taking a bad penalty in a big moment, which has burned Canada repeatedly over the years at this tournament, especially with IHF rules. They call the playbook, right? So, or the rule book, if you will. So I think there was just a little bit of a hiccup there with them with that. Now, in saying that, I think both of those kids should have been at the very least at camp and given an opportunity. Obviously, Zane wasn't originally invited to camp, and then was sort of the second to last invite after Harrison Brunicky, who was expected to be on the team, went down with a broken wrist and wasn't able to play. But I wrote it in my notebook, but watching Cam Allen struggle at camp the way he did, I thought Cam Allen was completely drowning in camp, in selection camp, and looked like he was in way over his head and like he didn't belong at that level. And said in the notebook after selection camp, but it was like, how can you watch Cam Allen look like this at this level and think Carter Yakemchuk couldn't have been here and Carter Yakemchuk would have looked like this? Like, he just wouldn't have. He's a better player. Forget the feet. He's a better player. He could have been an impact guy for this team. And if they struggle on the power play in this tournament, that's going to be the talking point, is some of the talent that they left at home. They elected for a very traditional top 6, bottom 6 forward group as well at this year's tournament, leaving players like Beckett Seneca, one of the most talented young prospects on the planet, at home, obviously. But even Matthew Wood, who was a part of last year's team, high skill guy, who's a point per game player the last 3 seasons in college hockey. Like, there were other forwards as well that they just couldn't get comfortable with. And if the power play in particular struggles, they've got guys like Tanner Howe and Jet Luchenko, guys who aren't typical power play players at a tournament of this level. They've got those guys featured on their power play at the moment. Tanner Molendyk and Matthew Schaefer are very good power play quarterbacks in their own right, in the WHL and the OHL, but I don't think anybody would argue that those are better power play options than Zane Parekh or Carter Yakemchuk, for example. So that's the big thing for me. You look at the power play that the U.S. is going to put out on the ice against Canada on New Year's Eve. It's going to have James Haggins, Zeev Boyum, Ryan Leonard, Gabe Perreault. Second unit is going to have Trevor Connolly, Cole Iserman, like pure power play players. They made that a priority on their roster. And if Canada's power play goes out against USA on New Year's Eve in what is the biggest game of the group play, and they struggle, and I think that's possible that Trey Augustine shuts the door on them, then you're going to have questions going into the quarterfinals about some of the personnel decisions that they made. So Canada still has an excellent roster. I do think people read into it a little bit too much at times. But you also look at Canada's blue line, not to give it too much ammunition to Sens fans, but you also look at Canada's blue line. They elected to bring 5 lefties and 3 righties as well. And I don't think they were super excited about Bo Wakey being one of those righties, for example. I knew that Andrew Gibson and Oliver Bonk were going to be on the team, but the third guy who sort of snuck his way onto the team was Bo Wakey. And I like Bo Wakey a lot as a player, excellent skater. I know Hockey Canada's high on him. But to bring 5 lefties when you're bringing 8D and to not bring a 4th righty is another thing that I think deserves at least some question marks heading into the tournament.
Well, Scott, I've already got Carter Yakemchuk power play highlights queued up, and every time Canada goes 0 for on the power play, I will be posting one and just saying, you miss me. Hope you're enjoying our chat with Scott. We'll get right back to it. But first, Pilsy's got a word from one of our favorite sponsors.
This episode is also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Look, the NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on the over-under, same-game parlays, and finding some fun futures. Not only can you bet on who's going to win the game, but FanDuel's got bets for which players will score touchdowns. I like doing the Gronk spike touchdown bonus anytime touchdown bet. You can get a 30% boost on that. How many points, each team will score, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
We're still cheering for Canada. We're still Canadians at the end of the day. And a storyline we always follow here on a goalie-friendly show is who's in net for Canada. And is it a clear #1, or are we going to have a battle like we have in a few of the past years?
We definitely have a battle. They made sure to get ice time for all 3 of their goalies into camp. As you guys know, typically when the tournament's in North America in the past, Canada has only brought 2 goalies. And they've often told the third stringer, sort of, go back to your junior team. If someone gets injured, we'll bring you in. It's in Canada. It's a short flight. But I think last year, with some of the troubles that they had with injuries in Sweden, was a bit of a wake-up call. They got Jagger Furcus over there late in the tournament, and then Jagger wasn't even able to get into a game because he was so jet-lagged and all of that. Obviously,
Jorian Donovan too, right? Didn't he come over last minute?
Jorian came over late. So all of that, I think they've learned their lesson. The IHF also changed the rules. It used to be you had a 22-man roster and you could bring 25, but those three extra guys could not play unless there was an injury. Now they've changed the rules at the World Juniors to align with the rules at Men's Worlds, where all 25 guys can play. So now they can tell the teams of those players, the CHL teams of those players, look, in the past, we sent them back because they weren't going to play unless an injury happened. Now we can guarantee that we're going to get everybody into the group play. Everyone's going to play at least one game, and we're going to give everybody an opportunity to continue to evaluate. And so everybody is going to play. I'm not sure whether all three goalies will play. I would guess that Jack Ivankovic, the 2025 draft eligible, is kind of the third man, and that really we're looking at a battle between Carter George and Carson Bjarnason for the Canadian net. And really, they only have to make that decision by New Year's Eve. Like that's the sort of critical juncture for them in terms of knowing who their goalie is going to be. The goalie who plays New Year's Eve is almost certain to play the quarterfinal. Win or lose, or should at least. He should be told it's their net. Last year, we saw Mathis Lousseau, though, play every second in the tournament, and I thought he looked tired by the end of it. So I think Canada is also cognizant of that. I think you'll see both Bjarnason and George play games here. And if I had to guess, I would guess that it's George in the end. He won gold for them at U18 Worlds in the spring. He was excellent, debatably the top goaltender at that tournament. He won gold for them at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup. Bjarnason in his U18 Worlds with Hockey Canada was just okay, and then got a concussion midway through the tournament, and sort of pre-concussion hadn't looked good. Bjarnason has the better numbers in Brandon this year than George has in Owen Sound, but that Owen Sound team is terrible. So I think they believe in Carter George, and he would be my choice. I think Carter's the better goalie.
Now, speaking of goalies, Scott, we're a hashtag goalie friendly show on the Locked On Senators podcast. And I think if you would have told Sens fans a couple months ago that the only Sens prospect that will be representing the Ottawa Senators in Ottawa would be a goalie for Kazakhstan, they'd be a little surprised. But we're behind our guy, Vladimir Nikitin. What can you tell us about Vladimir Nikitin?
Super athletic kid, sort of a lot like if you look back at what they saw in Levi Marilainen, sort of similar profile, not the biggest kid, kind of a skinnier kid like Levi, but really quick feet like Levi, good one-on-one with shooters. Obviously, Levi sort of developed himself as kind of a shootout breakaway specialist with his quick feet and his athleticism, his mobility, all of that. Nikitin's kind of the same. Not the same caliber. Like this may be the last time that we see, frankly, I'm not trying to sort of shit on the kid, if you will, but this may be the last time that we see Nikitin in Ottawa. So I don't think he's likely to get signed to an entry-level contract or that kind of a thing. But he's had a respectable sort of MHL come up, sort of been a good junior player and that kind of a thing. And then the name of his game is just really mobile. Like I think you'll see him make some big stretch saves and some big saves in this tournament. And the fans, I hope at TD Place, will really get behind him and rally behind him. It could be tough though. Like we could see him giving up 10 spots in this tournament. Like he's
going to have 50 shots a night, right? Like it's going to be wild.
That group is a little bit weaker, right? Because you have Canada, USA, and Finland in the other group. Really the only team that should run up that group is the Swedes. But
and that's who they open against too.
Yeah, it could be tough. Could be tough. You could see a yank in the first game, which would be tough. But no, he's been the backbone of this team and a big part of the reason they were promoted. And they had a lot of kids actually who were 19 when they got promoted, which is always tough for those teams when the core of your team has to move on before you actually play in the World Juniors. They actually had a few like players who are playing in the VHL and in the KHL who were a part of that age group, like some really good players over in Russia. So yeah, it's going to be tough for him, but maybe he'll have one of those miracle 60 save nights where they lose 3-2 in overtime to Slovakia or something, and he puts on a bit of a show, right? I think that's what you're hoping for if you're a Sens fan.
Wow, what a dream, eh? So I know that Gabriel Eliasson seems like he's like the 7th or 8th guy. He might get a call if there's an injury or two. Any surprise there? I know he was one of the youngest guys in the age group. You're not surprised that Eliasson wasn't? Or what can you tell us maybe about his development since going to Barrie in the OHL?
Yeah, I wasn't really surprised. I don't think he was seriously in the conversation to make this team. He wasn't really a part of the U20 team in the fall because he's in Barrie. That he kind of just stayed in Barrie. Like he didn't travel over and play in the Five Nations and that kind of a thing. So once you're not sort of involved with the U20 program in the fall, it becomes hard unless you're a Tom Willander, for example, and you're playing college hockey and you're a stud. It becomes hard to make that team, especially as an 18-year-old. I think he'll more be in the picture for next year's team. He also really struggled with his discipline at U18 Worlds and was only playing like 8, 10, 11 minutes a night by the end of that tournament in the important games at U18 Worlds just 6 months ago, right? So still had some learning to do. I do think there has been some learning in Barrie. He's played predominantly with Tristan Bertucci, and they've been a very good D pairing in the OHL. Honestly, I've been up to Barrie several times to see them play this year. Barrie's kind of the closest or one of the closest rinks to me, so I'm there pretty often. Kishon Aitchison's obviously a top prospect in this year's draft as well, so I've made him a priority this year. And when I've been up there, he's been good. Still, there's still some discipline issues. Like he loves that cross check in front of the net. Like he just can't help himself.
How about the teddy bear toss night, Scott? That's just classic Gabriel Elias.
Oh, yeah, of course. He's got to get in the mix at the one time of the game when he shouldn't be getting in the mix. But defensively, he's been really solid. Like his underlying numbers in terms of goal differential and shot, Instat gives us access to shot data as well, and sort of the classic possession metrics as well. And he suppresses shots really well at that level and takes up a lot of ice and that kind of a thing. The offense is still very, very limited. He told me at the rookie tournament, and his agent sort of talked to me about it a little bit as well, but he had a really short stick last year at the J20 level in Sweden. And they kept telling him it's too short, it's too short, it's too short. You need a longer stick. And he didn't want to make the switch in season. So this offseason, he lengthened his stick, and not just lengthened it, but it's like way longer. And now when you see him handle the puck and the stick's way out in front of his body, and it can be a little bit of a grenade under pressure. I think it helps him defensively, but his puck handling, he's still got to get comfortable with the puck on his stick. Like it's pretty noticeable when you watch him play, even at the OHL level. But I mean, still big boy, menacing presence. I would expect here at some point that he gets signed to an ELC. I do think they're going to sign him as early as sort of later in this year. If they go on a deep playoff run, which Barrie is aiming to do, he could be a big part of that. And really, he just needs to develop some of the finer skills, and then he's going to always have to walk that fine line between putting his team shorthanded and being a physical presence that people are afraid to go out there against, right? So very unique player. Like he's in terms of the prospect world, he's one of one right now.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, he's already stepped foot inside the CTC. This is him at a Sens game a couple weeks ago. Before that teddy bear toss night when he was in town, we've been chatting a bit with him, and just seems like an awesome guy. And we
great kid.
push everybody towards the feature that you did around Sens rookie tournament, as well as you already mentioned it earlier, that notebook you did where Steve Staios had some comments on Carter Yakemchuk. And while you're at the Athletic, your colleague Julian McKenzie, who we had on the postcast last night, got to see Yakemchuk up close and personal on Wednesday night in Calgary, and had a couple great quotes from him, his coach, and all that. So lots of great hockey content at the Athletic, and we know that the World Juniors and the draft coverage is second to none. Final question for me, and it's on that point, Scott. The NHL draft, this is where we start to pay attention. I know for you and others, it goes years back about how these players are developing, but for guys like us, we watch the World Juniors, and then the rest of the season, how are they going to get the race to the NHL draft? Which draft eligibles in this tournament should we be keeping our eye on?
Well, I think maybe one of the stories of this tournament is the big three going head to head on New Year's Eve. The presumptive top three prospects in this draft class are James Higgins, Porter Martone, and Matthew Schaefer. And on New Year's Eve, NHL scouts are going to fill the Canadian Tire Center to watch the three of them go head to head. So I'm very much looking forward to that as a measuring stick game. All three of those guys are playing important roles for their team. James Higgins is centering the USA's top line with Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard, who they all played together, obviously, at Boston College. Porter Martone is a staple in the top 9 for Hockey Canada. And Matthew Schaefer has kind of emerged despite being a very, very young player, he's actually almost eligible for the 2026 draft. Matthew Schaefer has emerged as kind of a middle pairing, second pairing guy for Team Canada here. So that's going to be a fascinating night because it feels wide open. And obviously with Celebrini and Bedard, it hasn't felt like that since the Slavkovsky, Shane Wright, Simon Nemec, Logan Cooley draft. That was really the last time that it felt like there was an actual competition for first overall. This year, it's real. I think today I would probably guess if I were to survey NHL scouts that Matthew Schaefer, the defenseman, would be the first overall pick in this year's draft. But entering the year, James Higgins was the front runner. Early on in the season, after Porter Martone got off to his hot start, when Matthew Schaefer was out with mono, it was Porter Martone who kind of emerged as the front runner. So I think it'll depend on which team's drafting there. It'll depend very much on their play at this tournament. And really, that New Year's Eve game is going to be awesome. So that's probably going to be my New Year's Eve story. I'll talk to some scouts after the game and sort of put together an analysis of where that race stands, I think. But they're not the only ones. Victor Eklund is a potential top 15 pick with the Swedes and is having an excellent year with Djurgården and Hockey Allsvenskan, the second tier in Sweden. Obviously, we all know Victor's brother, William Eklund, is having a good season with the San Jose Sharks. So there's some other draft content. It's not just those big three, but those guys are the meat and potatoes of what you're looking at in terms of 2025. And I'm really, really excited to see how they all do, because I think they could all be impact guys. I think Higgins is probably in the best position to succeed at the tournament and really pop, just because he's playing with Leonard and Perreault, who I believe are two of the 3 or 4 best forwards in this event this year. And that line is going to do some damage. But I could see Porter Martone and Matthew Schaefer also having excellent tournaments.
Nice. Well, as of right now, our friends over at FanDuel have James Hagan
get to that.
minus 134 to be the first overall pick. The field plus 102. So if you think Matthew Schaefer can do it, that might be for you. Only one defenseman's gone first overall in the last 7 drafts, or 6 rather.
Power.
Yeah, Owen Power in 2021. Otherwise, you have to go back to Rasmus Dahlin in 2018. And then before that, Aaron Ekblad in 2014. It's only 3 defensemen in the last more than a decade. So I'm rooting for Matthew Schaefer, even though that would probably mean Canada's power play does well at this tournament as well, as he's quarterbacking the top unit, at least through your tweets at selection camp. But hey, that's going to be fun to watch. Not that I didn't already have New Year's plans to watch that game. Now that's a great secondary storyline to just the beauty that is Canada versus USA. Pillsy, you got a final question?
Yes, final question for me, Scott. We got to end on this, as we do with all your World Junior preview interviews when we have you on the show. What's your prediction for the winner? Who's getting the medals here, Scott?
Yeah, we did a survey at the Athletic of the staff, and I'll stick with my prediction there. I went Canada 1, USA 2, Sweden 3. But again, I think Canada-USA is as close to a coin flip as it's been in a long, long time. USA has the stronger top end. I think Canada is a deeper team. And ultimately, as is always the case in those games, I think discipline plays a much bigger role at the World Juniors than it does at men's tournaments like the Olympics or the World Cup or the Four Nations face-off that's coming up in the NHL, where guys can keep their cool. We see a lot of bad penalties at this tournament. I think ultimately that game on New Year's Eve is going to be decided on special teams and who can stay out of the box and who can keep their composure in front of 20,000 Sens fans at the CTC, because it's going to be loud in there. It's going to be an atmosphere these kids have never played in, and not all of them are always up to it. And emotions run very, very high at the World Juniors. I think it's part of what makes it such a sort of beautiful tournament, if you will. So it's going to be close, but I'll give the slight lean to Team Canada to bounce back after their disaster in Gothenburg last year.
All right, you got it there from Scott Wheeler. Make sure you're following him on social media, Scott C. Wheeler, and make sure to subscribe to The Athletic for all the great coverage. Scott, we'll have you back hopefully during the February break. We'd love to chat Sens prospects. I mean, I wanted so badly to bring up Blake Montgomery, what he's doing right now in London, but we'll save that conversation and a whole lot more in February. Have a great time at the tournament. We'll be following along on social media and on The Athletic, and always appreciate your time and your insight.
Cheers, guys. I'll have my Sens prospect pool rankings out by then as part of my annual project.
I thought you were going to say you're going to have your Sens jersey on at the CTC.
No, but I'll have my pool rankings, my 2025 pool rankings for all 32 teams will be out in January. So I'm sure we can get into where I have Blake Montgomery ranked in that.
All right, Pillsy. So looking at the schedule for Team Canada at the World Juniors, I'm going to be locked on to all of these games. Tonight at 7:30, Canada versus Finland. Then on Friday, Canada versus Latvia, again at 7:30. They will be off on Saturday. On Sunday, they will play Germany again at 7:30, seeing a theme here. But all roads lead to the round robin finale on New Year's Eve at 8 p.m. Eastern, Canada versus the United States. All of those games will have a GLEBE Central Pub shuttle, so make sure you get your tickets online at GLEBECentralPub.com. Pillsy, any final thoughts on today's show? It's been a nice kind of break, I think, from Sens hockey. And again, it couldn't have come at a better time with Linus Ullmark hurt, Michael Amadio hurt, Michael Amadio out with an injury after that greasy hit from Vinny Desharnais against the Canucks. You're obviously hoping for good news sooner rather than later on David Perron and Artem Zub, but a nice time for the infirmary to really have some time to relax and work on getting back into the lineup.
Well, and Ross, we still haven't had an update on Anton Forsberg either, which will be very important if we don't have an update on Ullmark. So there are a lot of injuries that have riddled the Sens over this holiday break, and hopefully that'll help them recover. But if you're itching for Sens hockey, we got to wait on Ottawa Senators hockey. But today, Ross, the Belleville Senators are up against the Toronto Marlies, and this one's at 2 p.m. at Scotiabank Arena. So this is a big game for the Belleville Senators, Ross, as sure, they're in 5th place in the North Division, which would put them in a playoff spot with the way the AHL does playoffs. But the Syracuse Crunch are only 1 point behind. Now, the Sens have 3 games in hand, but still, you don't want to lose that 5th spot. And the Marlies are the team right ahead of them, 5 points ahead. So the Belleville Senators are going to want to win this one. And then after this game, Ross, it's back to the Bay of Quinte CAA Arena on Saturday, December 28th. So it'd be nice if the Sens could get both of these wins here, especially one in the big house at Scotiabank Arena.
And it was good that that they got a win in their last game. They'd lost 3 games in a row. So they bounced back. And you know who's a guy I'm going to be keeping my eye on today when I watch that game? Jan Yannick, back in the lineup and scored a goal against Springfield. That was just his 8th game of the regular season. He's already up to 5 points now as well. And we know he plays a pesty style of hockey. Also want to give a shout out to Oscar Pettersson.
Yep.
Pistol Pete got on the score sheet in that game as well, and then got a misconduct at the end of the game. Thanks for coming. So big night for him. He was a first star in that game too. So I'm excited for this game. I think it's a good opportunity here for Belleville to get a bit of a roll going after a tough stretch there of 3 straight losses. So we'll be following for all that on Twitter at Sens Central, and we'll be back tomorrow to tee up a busy weekend against 2 very good hockey teams for the Ottawa Senators. For today, we say goodbye. For Brandon Piller, I'm Ross Levitan. This has been another edition of the Locked On Senators podcast, your team every day.